So we'll get on with the show. As many of you know, I'm Alex Orfinger. I'm the publisher of the Washington Business Journal, and I am so pleased to welcome you all here today. I'm glad that many of you have jumped in and introduced yourselves in the chat. Please remember, as we get into the program, keep yourself on mute. And since I really love your company, I hope as many of you will try to keep your camera on so we can see you, your friends and colleagues can see you, and just say hello to you in the chat. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here and taking the time out of your day to join us what I know will be an informative and insightful hour discussing the state of residential real estate in Greater Washington. Residential real estate is a favorite topic of mine, and I know it is for so many of our readers and obviously for so many of you because you're all here today. It's a topic that we discuss over the dinner table with friends and neighbors. It's not only an important asset for many of us, but the industry itself is really a vital one for the Greater Washington community. It's a driver of economic growth, and residential real estate and trends in the industry really tell us where growth is headed in the region. So we've got a lot of topics to cover today. Plus, we're going to hopefully have some time to take your questions at the end of the session. So how is this going to work? I'm going to introduce you to our panel in a second. We'll spend some time talking about what they see in the market and what they expect in 2022. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end, again, to take your questions. But in the meantime, you can just drop them into the chat box so we know what your questions are. So let's get started. First, I want to introduce David Howell. David is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of McInerney Associates. David joined the firm in 1996 and has held numerous positions as a recognized real estate leader. Serves on many local boards and some national boards as well. Next, I'd like to welcome Lauren Kennard, President of First Excel Title. Under Lauren's leadership, she has grown the company not only in Greater Washington, but has facilitated expansion into South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. Please also welcome Leo Anzalega, who's the Senior Vice President of residential lending at Draper and Kramer Mortgage Corporation. With more than 18 years of experience in the mortgage industry, Leo also designs and facilitates how-to development core classes for his real estate agencies and small business owners. And lastly, please welcome Jan Brito. Jan is the president of the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors and a principal of Brito Associates of Compass. Jan began her career in the real estate field in 2005. So welcome to all of you. So thanks. So we'll kick off with the sort of the basic question. Let's just talk quickly about the state of the market. And what are you seeing right now? And I would like to ask David to kick us off here. David?
Yeah, Alex, thank you very much. It's a real honor to participate with these great folks this morning and appreciate the Business Journal putting this together. The Washington, D.C. residential real estate market is extremely healthy. We're very fortunate to live in this greater community. But I think one of the things that we look at very closely is, which I don't think will surprise anybody on this call, there is no one market. The reality is conditions for condos in DC are very different than townhomes in Loudoun County. But overall, we have an extraordinarily healthy market. We're seeing some early signs with inventory starting to rebound that the market is slowing just a little bit. But that doesn't mean the market is slow by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of our comparisons we typically do to the same time last year, and that's really not a fair comparison because this time last year was about as white hot as any market I've seen in the 37 years I've been doing business in this area. Perhaps the more relevant comparison is to 2019 and 2018. And by any measure, this market is still considerably stronger than what we considered to be very healthy markets in 2018 and 19. So it's looking good.
Yeah. Jen, you want to add anything to that? Go ahead. I'm particularly interested in the balance between sort of whether it's an inventory issue, supply issue, demand issue, like what in the current market right now.
Well, there's definitely still an inventory issue, although as David mentioned, we are starting to see a little bit of an uptick. I can tell you that coming out of the summer, there was the typical summer slowdown, which seemed like somebody opened the floor and let everybody fall through because of the frenzy we had in the spring, right? But it was a typical summer slowdown. And I think a lot of it had to do with the availability of travel and vaccinations, and people just needed to get out of town.
Yeah.
But they're back now. And so we're starting to see an uptick in buyer activity and a little more in inventory, which is definitely going to help the situation for buyers that are out there.
Leo, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, from a lending standpoint, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure, real treat being here with all of you. I think the most obvious question that everyone asks when it comes to lending is like, okay, where are interest rates now? Kind of what do you see in the foreseeable future? And historically low interest rates, things that my parents probably have never had never even conceived of, right? I mean, rates in the high twos, low threes, and so kind of forecasting forward. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I do have a friend that does. His name is Barry Habib. The people that I respect, people that I follow, we really do believe that rates are going to stay low for the foreseeable future. There's going to be some movement in the marketplace, roughly about 1/8, and maybe 2 3/4% plus or minus. But historically, I think we're going to definitely stay low. And to piggyback on what Jan said and also what David said, what's interesting to me is kind of seeing the amount of first-time home buyers that are coming into the marketplace for the very first time. I think the boom in births in the 80s, really is contributing to a lot of people entering the market for the very first time. So seeing that in the future for sure is something that I think we definitely need to be aware of.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Lou. And how about Lauren? How about you? What's the state of the market from your perspective right now?
From the title perspective, everything kind of flows down to us. So we are busy with the home buyers. We're busy with people refinancing, maybe getting ready to renovate a property, or maybe they're tearing down a property and building their dream home. We're seeing all sorts of various transactions. And so I think, for us, we are also seeing that, not just us, but all vendors are busy, whether it's a surveyor, an abstractor. We're all seeing kind of everybody under kind of very, hard constraints of, the pressure of having so much volume, because that's what it does. It comes in waves, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I'm kind of curious. I do actually want you all to take out your crystal ball a little bit. I know, David, you said that the better comparison is between 2021 and 2019. And we sort of have to take 2020, for so many reasons we want to erase 2020 anyway. But I would like to, when you're looking at 2022 and when you're thinking, when you're forecasting, when you're planning, when you're budgeting, what do you think that year is going to be like for the residential real estate market? And David, I'm going to turn back to you first. Sure. Again, too.
It's a real fair question. I'm not sure I've got a great answer, Alex, except that
my job is to ask those questions.
You got it. Absolutely. From our projection standpoint, we're very optimistic about 2022. We think things are setting up very nicely to conclude this year on a positive note and to head into next year on a positive note as well, too. And Leo touched on one of the main reasons why. These historically low interest rates are keeping buyers engaged in the market, even in the face of escalating prices. If we saw a significant uptick in interest rates, then maybe things would change a bit. But kind of addressing something that Jan had talked about earlier as well, too. This is largely an inventory issue. Certainly the demand has been high and higher in 2020 than it has been in previous years. But the bigger part of the story is the lack of inventory. And we don't see anything on the horizon. I don't mean to speak for Jan and Lauren and Leo, but I don't see anything on the horizon that is likely to change that inventory picture in a significant way. We are starting to see listings tick up a bit. So we're seeing some gradual increases in inventory, but we're not even terribly concerned about a foreclosure wave or short sales or anything like that as mortgage forbearance comes to an end. There's just too many positives in the market and too little inventory for that to create any bubble. And I know we've talked about this before as well, too, and Jan can probably address it better than I can, but we get the question often about whether we're in a bubble. And I don't think we are. And I know Jan feels that same way. It's probably better for me to punt that over to Jan.
No, I definitely agree that we're not in a bubble. I mean, it's a totally different situation than it was back during the recession. And you're right, David, there's still very low inventory. These rates are predicted to continue into next year, right, Leo?
Yeah.
It's supply and demand. I mean, it's going to be a very brisk 2022, I believe. And the other segment of the market is the 65 plus crowd, who have been staying put for fear of moving on to their next phase, whether it be a senior community or just downsizing. They've been a little bit hesitant. So I think there's a ton of inventory tied up in that segment of the market.
Stop that.
Was it something I said? Anyway, so I think, maybe later in 22, 23, we might see some movement from that segment as well.
Yeah, but if I could add to that also, I
Yeah, I
think
would
the
love
equity,
to. Yeah.
yeah, the equity position that most home buyers have now compared to even before the liquidity crisis it's night and day, right? A lot of people were, walking away from their homes because there really wasn't a lot of equity in their properties. Whereas now, I mean, David, you can kind of talk about this. We had a conversation about this at length. The equity position for the majority of these sellers and buyers, I mean, it's upwards of like 20 to 25%, especially since last year, right? And so, there is something to be said about, leaving that behind. And I think, in terms of a bubble, I don't necessarily see the data that supports that.
Yeah, I would
So
agree.
so-
I mean, the thing is, the people who are in forbearance most likely have enough equity that if they can't pull themselves out when it ends, they can sell and move on.
Yeah.
So you sort of underscored a couple of things that are very different than the downturn during the Great Recession. Is there anything else that makes this time different?
Yeah, I kind of jump in on that. As we all know, the horrors that we saw when the bubble burst, and it truly was a bubble.
Mhm.
The bubble was created by artificially creating demand with loans that were not repayable by the borrowers, with artificially low interest rates. And so when the interest rate reset, there was a flood of inventory of people that could no longer afford their homes and were actually upside down on their homes as well too. None of that exists in this marketplace. And as Jan indicated, to the extent that, and we hate to see anybody have to sell their home because they can no longer afford to live there. But in this situation, with I guess roughly 3% of mortgages in this area have been in forbearance, if every single one of those homes came on the market, this is a market that could absorb easily a 3% increase in the listing inventory. And they would not be distressed sales. They wouldn't be foreclosure sales in all likelihood, although there's always a few. The reality is, and Leo addressed it as well, people have equity. And it's a shame that they have to sell, but they could sell and actually make some money.
Yeah. So there is a question in the chat that I just want to jump in on it, and it really addresses the inventory issue a little bit. We read a lot, in the Business Journal, in addition to other national media, about the influx of corporate acquisition of single family as well as multifamily housing. Is that affecting the inventory issue at all? Do you see it affecting it in a significant way in Greater Washington?
Well, again, I hate to jump in, but I'll jump in and then turn it over to anybody else. Not yet, but I would say yet.
Okay.
The major institutional buyers aren't really hugely active in this marketplace yet, but it's inevitable that they will. This is such an attractive area from a long-term investment perspective. But Alex, I think it's a very relevant question. In some other places in the country where institutional buyers have come in and changed the market in a significant way that changes the nature of housing stock. And again, we haven't seen that here yet, but I understand in Houston and some other areas with a relatively more homogeneous housing stock, institutional investors have come in and purchased a significant number of homes, not for the purpose of improving them and flipping them, but to keep them as an asset class to generate rental income. And so to the extent that that happens, I think there are some real social equity issues with that. There are some public policy issues with that. When you take chunks of what has been the churn in the market and semi-permanently convert for sale homes to rental homes. And I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. It has the potential to kind of change the fabric of what our communities look like.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've also read a lot about it in terms of multifamily also, where a lot of institutional investors are picking up some of those properties as well. Anyone else want to just talk about the inventory issues and impact of other outside buyers?
I personally have no data on the institutional buyers myself. It's interesting, David, that you've seen that in some other markets occurring.
Yeah.
It's great. So, so I think we've tackled this a little bit, but so if you're facing a first-time buyer right now, worried about buying at the top of the market, they're worried about this bubble. How do you respond to them? Like, what are you saying to them? And if we are in a bubble that we don't see, what should that mean to our home buyers?
Well, I would say that we are located in one of the strongest economies in the country with very stable employment, and the chances that they would lose value are less prevalent than maybe in other parts of the country.
Mhm.
Very strong market here.
Yeah.
Strong economy.
I'll kind of add one thing to that as well. So I'm sorry, Leo, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think if you really bring it down to the basics, here's usually what I would say to someone like that, right? You buy a house when you're ready to buy a house, right? Whether it's a great interest rate market, whether it's a high interest rate market. The question that I would ask a first-time home buyer today that is concerned about a bubble is, well, what is your ultimate goal with this property, right? Are you looking to flip the unit in 6 months from now? Well, if that's the case, you probably are better off renting, right? But real estate, and David has taught me this, right? And I believe this to my core. It really is the greatest hedge against inflation, right? A long-term wealth really is tied to real estate as a whole. And so to that first-time home buyer, I would say, yes, we are, as Jan said, in a very strong market. But ultimately, you buy a house when you're ready to buy a house. And if this is a long-term investment for you, and on average, people are staying there for about 5 to 8 years, right? So I'm not talking about 30 years, right? You will see a return on your original investment. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, you didn't, Leo. And this is probably because I'm not smart enough to understand what the market actually is on this. I've never known what the top of the market is, unless you're looking in your rearview mirror by 6 months. But one of the great things about this market is that never really quite sure that we have topped out. I can tell you personally, I wish I still owned every house that my wife and I have owned over the years, because if we still had them, we'd be doing exceptionally well. And it's not that, yeah, and it's not that there aren't some downtimes, but there are. But I think Leo nailed it. If you look at this over a 5 to 8 year horizon, it's even in the worst parts of this market. Somebody that bought at the top of the market before the bubble, if they could hold on for a decade, they were still going to be fine. So it's a matter of timing. This market is held up better than just about any market in the entire country.
I would
Go ahead, Lauren.
I would just chime in from a settlement perspective. So a lot of the home buyers that we see come in with this area being so transit, they're coming in from markets that are not as strong. And so they feel very confident in buying in this market, because if they do get relocated, we see a lot of military clients coming through. They know that A, they can either sell it, or B, they can rent it because of how strong this area is, and it's a great investment for them. So although, it can be a very scary thing, it's very exciting for us to be able to turn over those keys to those homeowners at closing, because, it's their investment. And a lot of them say we need to live somewhere. And so why not, put our roots down here where we know someday that we can rent or sell.
So I'm keeping this panel on their toes because we've got some great questions from our community out there. Is there any, there's also news out there that 1 out of 10 renters are late on their payments. Is there any connection between that and the health of the single family market? Is there any correlation there?
I'll take a crack at it, and probably not a very good crack at it. Again, you hate to see anybody that's in a situation where they can't afford their housing, whether that's a rental or for sale. We haven't seen any significant impact in the single family market to this point yet. And it's obviously an enormous public policy issue. And some of the rental assistance money has been slow to get into people's hands. And again, I feel for anybody in the government that has to make these decisions, because to the extent that renters can't pay their rent, there's a landlord that may not be able to pay their mortgage as well too. So it's a really tough question about where that relief should go. Having said all that, and again, it's not a great conclusion. I don't personally think it's going to have an enormous impact on the market. It has impact on individual families' lives, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah, I would agree with that, David. And I think I read last week that some of those funds were starting to be released to these landlords. So hopefully the situation will improve a bit.
Yeah. It might have a longer tail of, some of them might not become home buyers later on because they are facing continued sort of economic stress.
Yep.
So that might have a longer term impact. But so let's talk a little bit about disruption in the industry. If I could go back to your industry a little bit, and you all are facing a much more educated customer now than ever before, both in terms of the buying and selling of a house, through mortgage lending, through title. How is that changing the way that you're facing your customer? Like how has it changed what you're doing yourself in your own industry, in your own sector of this industry? And Lauren, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to answer that first. Okay.
Sure.
Has it affected the title world at all?
I would say yes. I would say, having more use of the internet has made, fraud come into play a lot more, not just in every industry, but very specifically in the title industry. And, I think we saw in 2020, 76% increase of title agents reporting wire fraud. And so that's something that, although it's really easy to send an email rather than picking up the phone and kind of going old school and talking to somebody on the phone, a lot of people, it's a lot more convenient to email than to talk. And I do think that the internet has hurt us a little bit. It's helped us e-record and do various other things that we've needed to do when the courthouses have closed. But it's kind of touch and go. I would say that the wire fraud is a very big topic. I think that each of us could probably speak on and have some sort of experience with.
Great. Yeah.
Who wants to chime in next on that?
Yeah. Leo, how about you? I mean, in the mortgage market, how does this educated consumer sort of affect the way that you're facing your customers?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a pretty simple guy. And at the end of the day, it really does boil down to this one thing, right? And good people really deserve great advice, right? And I think we can't be afraid of technology disruption in this marketplace. But at the end of the day, people are still looking for guidance. They're still looking for advice. Now, on a macro level, I think this is a good thing for our industry because it's really causing people to evaluate their unique selling proposition, right? Like what makes us so unique? Technology really helps you understand, okay, well, you're bringing this service, they're bringing this service. What's different about you too, right? I read a really good book. It's called Unlocking the Consumer Value Chain by a Harvard business professor, Thales Teixeira. I highly recommend it. And he talks about this concept of like decoupling, right? Like, so an app is not going to change the way we do business, right? But it will decouple the value chain of a consumer experience, right? And so I think it's good for the industry, but at the end of the day, aligning yourself with someone that is for you, aligning yourself with someone that will give you great advice is important, because the alignment that these institutions, these agents, real estate professionals have will ultimately trickle down to the consumer. The consumer wins in that model, right? The consumer always wins, right? Like the questions that we're getting, the questions that our firm is currently tackling right now is, okay, well, why is it taking so long for us to close a transaction industry-wide? Last year my team and I served 200 families, secure mortgages for their homes, and on average we close in 15 days. Why can it be 8, right?
Right.
Why all the paperwork? And so I think technology plays a huge role in that, but ultimately it really boils down to, good people deserve great advice, and it's an advice world that we live in, and that won't change that.
Yeah. So David, this educated consumer. Most people are walking in with knowing what the market looks like a little bit, question mark. The whole relationship with a realtor has changed. Has it? So tell me, how has it changed the way that they're working with you and other realtors?
Like, it's a great question. I'm going to punt to Jan in a second because she's on the ground working with buyers and sellers every day. But I'm going to date myself and think back to a campaign that Sims department stores did in this area. And that may be about 5% of the people on the call that would recognize that. And their slogan was always, an educated consumer is our best customer. Mm-hmm. And I think that really holds true today. And I think everything that Lauren and Leo said, I would agree with. Having an informed consumer is helpful to us. The challenge with that is that sometimes information isn't the same thing as knowledge. And because there is no shortage of information out there. But one of the things that we try and think about, maybe so I can sleep at night, I tend to think of this stuff not as disruption, but as competition and as the natural evolution of business. Leo again nailed it directly. Good competition makes you better. And we do have to focus very much on the value that we're delivering to a consumer. And if we're not delivering value, they've got plenty of choices. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is that, because I was in the business before the internet existed, and I'm really dating myself, when I got into the business, personal computers were a brand new thing. So we've seen a few things go through cycles. There was great fear that the internet was going to disintermediate agents. The reality is the percentage of transactions in which there is an agent involved is higher today than it was before the internet came into existence. And again, I think Leo got it exactly. It's because people crave the human connection and the value that human beings can bring to it that computers can't.
You're not dating yourself that much though, David. Okay. Jan.
I totally agree with what David said about information is different from knowledge. And certainly there's a wealth of information out there for consumers all over the internet. And I love working with educated consumers. I love that. But what they need help with is interpreting that data and analyzing and making sense of it for them. And, let's face it, a home purchase or sale is typically the largest transaction in one's life. So it's a very big deal for most people. And they are going to rely on someone to guide them, as Leo mentioned, appropriately and with full service.
And just from our standpoint at the settlement table, there's definitely a difference throughout the transaction when there is someone that is full service and has that connection to their realtor, their title company. The buyer is much more informed and even more educated on the process, because they may be an educated buyer coming into this, but maybe they're not so fine-tuned on the process. But when they have people working for them that they can talk to and they can see and engage with, it really changes the outcome of the transaction.
So, disruption's not new to the industry. I mean, you've David, even you've faced this for all the years that you've been at. You've had different types of disruption. From Zillow to digital transactions that you've all talking in bits and pieces about, to this educated consumer who gets to see everything before they actually perhaps meet a realtor. If you were to jump forward, what should we be thinking about? What should our audience be thinking the disruptions will be in the next couple of years? 3 years out, 4 years out. Is there going to be any other significant changes that you all are planning for right now? Jan, I'm going to ask you to do that first.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad Jan's going to answer that.
And
I walked away.
I don't have a good answer, unfortunately.
Okay.
I don't think a whole lot about the disruptors, quite frankly. So, Leo, what do you say?
And I'm going to piggyback on professor from Harvard. He literally studied this for eight years, and he wrote this book. I think consumers have a lot of friction in various parts of the value chain. Okay, onboarding, right? Technology helps with onboarding a consumer into the value chain. Consumers have friction in the retention, the actual deal, right? And we've seen organizations, Lauren, you can talk about this, right? DocuSign, there's been so many things that have helped consumers in the actual process of the loan. But then post closing, like what happens after? Like there's a lot of technology out there that's helping consumers really understand how to take care of their home. So as I've been thinking this through, and I've been thinking this with our organization, there will be some changes, in my opinion, in at least those three areas, right? Do I think that, they're going to replace us with an app and we're going to be opening doors ourselves and we're going to be negotiating contracts? No, I don't think so. I think that's a very unique skill. And I think a real estate profession, it brings so much value because it's tied to advice, right? And so, but technology, I think, will definitely tackle, or at least try to attempt to tackle some of those areas.
Good. Thanks, Lou. I think that gave some good perspective on that. So let's get back to the current market. And I'm going to ask you to take out your crystal ball a little bit here. You're all very optimistic that there's nothing that could sort of disrupt the market significantly like we saw in 2009, 2010. I think we all talked about interest rates that could certainly go up and disrupt it in some way. But are there other hazards? Like, help our audience look around the corner a little bit from your professional perspective. Are there other hazards that might cause a bump in the market that will be an early indicator for us to just say, hey, something's going on? Leo, you're shaking your head, so I'm gonna see if you've got a.
Well, I'm gonna take David's thunder here, and David, you can piggyback. This is something I learned from you. Locking in low interest rates. People that have been locking in low interest. I mean, I'm talking sub low twos, high, mid threes at some point. I think that will definitely cause a little bit of a bump in the road later down, right? Because if a seller, and David, you can chime in after this, but if a seller is looking to sell that property, they're going to really think twice about letting go of that property and putting that on the market because of the interest rate that they secured maybe 5-6 years ago. So
if you're in at a two and change interest rate, and X years from now it's at 5%, let's say, you'll have some reticence sort of moving. Is that what you're saying, Leo?
I would argue, David, chime in. I would argue that would be the case.
Yeah.
Then again, we thought 5 was as low as it was going to get at one point, right?
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. David, how about you?
I'll piggyback on what Leo said. I love the term friction. And that topic that Leo just mentioned, I think will provide some friction. It's not that people won't move, but it'll be another element for them to think about selling their house. If you're 5 years into a 30-year mortgage and you've got a 2.5% loan and rates are at 5% now, it doesn't mean you won't move, but, and there may be circumstances that require you to move. Nonetheless, if you're making somewhat of a lateral move, are you really going to, without much thought, give up that 2.5% mortgage and buy something with a 5% mortgage? It's one of the reasons that we're less concerned about any significant increase in inventory over the next few years, because that's actually a headwind towards inventory. But Alex, to your question, I also kind of think about some of the things that we were very concerned about that were going to disrupt this economy or this region. Certainly, international conditions over which we have no control could have an impact on the health of this region or the health of the country. And I don't mean to minimize that, but we all remember distinctly what we were all doing roughly 20 years ago,
right, and
the horrors that were inflicted on this country. And specific to the real estate business, the market just stopped for about 3 weeks. And in addition to our global concerns, we were concerned about whether this market was going to rebound. And it not only rebounded, it rebounded with extraordinary health. And it kind of horrible price to pay, but energized people to be engaged in the economy. We saw the same thing in spring of last year with COVID, where the market to a very large degree stopped for about 6 weeks. And then it came roaring back. And I'm by no means suggesting that those things are good for the economy. They're not. But they're, I hope, an indication of how resilient the national economy is and our regional economy as well too. It's not the thing that say that things can't happen, because there's always those uncontrollable things, but we've survived some pretty big body blows.
Yeah, well said.
One of the other I was just going to say one of the other hazards would be, concerns about supply chains in various aspects and how that might take into account the housing market. I know, new construction has seen a lot of those disruptors this year with windows and AC units and various supplies. Anyone on this call that, has been looking at new construction or maybe even looking to put on a deck or something, and they've seen the supply chain kind of disruptions and delays. That's also something to consider.
So if we should see some disruptions in supplies for windows, appliances, other building materials, that could have an impact on inventory of new construction and inventory, and that might be the disruptor in the market. I'm just wanting to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Is
Yeah,
there
I
anything
think-
else? Go ahead,
I
Jen.
was just going to say, I think many people look to new construction over the last 6 months because of the lack of inventory in the resale market. But then there's the supply chain issues and the delayed deliveries and so forth. So it's very real.
Yeah, no, that's it's good. Is there anything else that could be a disruptive force?
I will mention one other thing that kind of goes back to your earlier question, Alex, about disruptors in the business. One of the things that I'm still having a hard time getting my arms around is that we have players in this business, whether they're on the mortgage side, the title side, or the real estate brokerage side, who are extremely well financed that don't appear to have the need to actually make money to do what they're doing. And I don't say that as a pejorative, it just simply as a reality. Companies with enormous staying power, and I'll be specific. Zillow, I think, has been profitable for 1 quarter in its 14-year existence. And they continue to generate revenue. They have a high market cap. And while on many levels I get it, I'm still not quite sure I see what the path to profitability is. I'm sure they do because they're a lot smarter than I am. But to the extent that I'm concerned about disruption, it is a different kind of disruption where we're in competition with people that don't have to make money to survive. And they'll figure it out. Hopefully I'll figure it out. We'll all figure it out about how we compete in that environment. But it is different in that regard.
Well, I can assure you that the media industry faces plenty of unprofitable organizations out there. So I feel what you're saying.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about, David, you hit on this a little bit. Many of us who have been here for a long time think about Greater Washington and particularly the residential real estate market as being better protected against these large downside swings. Do you think that still holds? And why is that? Why is there such resiliency in this market?
Well, I do think it holds. And it's not that we're immune to economic swings up and down, but our downs have never been as low as some other areas. When I think about Las Vegas and Phoenix that were just crushed when the bubble burst, we were down here, but we were not down anywhere close to that level. And I think the reality and the stability of the federal government and the associated contractors with that as a major employer here have given us some insulation to that. Our various economic development authorities have done an exceptional job of broadening our reach to be more attractive to the private industry as well too. And obviously we all know about what Amazon did 2.5 years ago in announcing their second headquarters here. So we have a very highly educated workforce compared to almost any place else in the country. We have a very stable employment picture, and that sets us up really well from the residential market. But there's no guarantees, but I'd rather be in business here than just about any place else in the country.
Yeah,
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Why DC is such a great market?
I would say ditto. Everything was said. Yeah.
Right.
Covered pretty much
It's like
everything.
there's not just eggs in one basket. There's a lot of different stuff going on. And so I think that's what makes it so strong.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I've got one last question, then I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. But when you think about the entire region, and if you had to, you're going to hate this question, but if you had to identify one particular submarket that you think has the opportunity for the fastest growth over the next couple of years, where would you buy your next house? Let's put it that way. Is there any particular submarket that you want to point to, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'll tackle it. I don't have a real estate license, but I'll tackle it. I'm intrigued, and I actually saw a question in the chat about kind of similar to this. The pandemic was an awful thing that happened to the entire country, the entire world, and a lot of people lost their lives. There's so much collateral damage that has happened because of it. But there's also been some interesting things to note from what we've experienced last year, and that's the concept of space. It's so interesting to me to see more and more people move out west, while teleworking into their jobs that are based in the city. And so Loudoun County to me has been something I've been very, very intrigued by. I mean, my brother bought a property in Purcellville, which is like an hour and 15 minutes from where I live. I mean, I don't even know where the nearest grocery store is, right? But yet he loves it. Very rural, 10 acres of land. I'm like, what are you going to do with 10 acres of land, But man, there's so more and more people moving out west. And so I would say Loudoun County is one of the fastest growing counties. I mean, in one of the hottest counties in the area. I have some friends of mine, the Platinum Group of Pearson Smith that are #1 in that area, and their businesses are booming. So that's one. And I mean, David, you and I have talked at length at this. There are several counties that perhaps are being ignored as well. Maybe Prince George's County, Prince William County, and other 2 counties. But if I could also chime in, I would say it also depends on the type of property, right? So like just today, I was talking to a potential buyer that was looking at investment properties. Said, well, where can I buy an investment property, a condominium? I would say, well, DC, downtown DC, especially downtown DC, buildings that have elevators, right? Why? Because the pandemic has caused people to have an interesting concept with the space that they live in. So those are some of the initial thoughts.
Great, thank you. How about you, David?
Yeah, and Leo is exactly right. COVID transformed the market in Loudoun County. The Loudoun County market was strong before that. It doesn't sound a little like inside baseball, but one of the things that we track is absorption rates, which is simply the percentage of inventory that's going under contract is on the market for 30 days or less. Prior to COVID in Loudoun County, that tended to be, whether it was an attached home or a detached home or a condo, in the 30% range. Ever since the market emerged from COVID in May or June of last year, the absorption rates in Loudoun County have been between 60 and 80%. If something goes on the market, odds are it's going to sell. And if it doesn't sell, it's because the seller has priced it wrong. And so the suburbs, the outer suburbs in particular, have outperformed the inner city market or close-in markets ever since we emerged from COVID. And that doesn't mean that those closer-in markets are bad. They're not. But again, I think Leo nailed it exactly. The longer-term play in terms of return on investment is probably buying those condos in close-in DC or close-in Montgomery County or Arlington or Alexandria, where there is a relative abundance of inventory compared to the demand right now. It's one of the few places where buyers can go and actually negotiate and get some leverage. And so if you have the ability to buy and hold for a period of time, I think there's some real longer-term investment potentials in those properties that are not selling fast right now. And again, those are typically inner city condos.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Jen, you want to jump in? Or
Sure. Yeah, I can only speak to Montgomery County and DC. So the market inside the Beltway is pretty much still pretty strong, especially in DC. There's some areas where, for instance, North Cleveland Park, American University Park, you put a house on the market and it sold yesterday. You know what I mean? It's just that brisk.
Yeah.
But there's some real opportunity in other areas of DC that are still developing, particularly east of the Anacostia River. So that's an area to watch. And there's some good opportunities to get in early and build equity there.
Yeah. So we've got some questions from the audience that I want to tackle. And, one of them is a question that's near and dear to my heart a little bit, which is the danger of gentrification affecting the DMV. The way that San Francisco, this is the question, the way that San Francisco is suffering from huge spikes in property. All the people, the question is, what do we do with people that are actually working in stores, in providing services, and they can't afford to live near their place of work here in Greater Washington. They're longer and longer commutes. It does affect our overall community in some ways, and it really underscores this enormous rift we have between the folks that are accruing the wealth as opposed to sort of people on the lower ends of the spectrum. As people in the real estate industry, how do you address that? How do you think about solutions, and how do you be part of the solution in some ways? Is that either any of you want to tackle that?
I'll take a crack at it, Alex, not because I have any solutions. I don't, because this is a public policy issue that every major city in the country is grappling with, and probably all over the world as well, too. The very thing that makes us attractive as a community and is driving up prices. We know when prices are being driven up, we are driving people out as well, too. And that's a significant challenge. Some of it can be addressed by very challenging public policy issues. We all know we need to have more affordable housing, and there needs to be an opening up of some of the regulatory and zoning issues that will allow for accessory dwelling units, that will allow for more affordable housing to be purchased. And among the reasons the public policy challenge is people tend to like where they live and don't want that to come into their area. They don't want to see those ADUs. This is probably a third rail in DC. I'm a Virginia resident, but work in DC all the time. A potential solution, and this will send people from the call just screaming into my inbox for email, is lift the height restriction by a floor or two on some areas in Washington, DC, where you can add housing units to an existing footprint. None of us want to see DC become a high-rise community. And I know there's significant impediment to doing that, but we add a floor or two to a lot of the residential developments we have right now, and we could create some more housing in the same existing footprint.
So I would like to add that GCAR is very involved from an advocacy standpoint in working with the Montgomery County Council and within the DC Association of Realtors, the DC City Council, in supporting affordability and doing what we can to move that along. This past year, GCAR came into a partnership with Capital Area Asset Builders, and we're offering an 8-week webinar session to low-income individuals who might not otherwise be able to get into a home or wouldn't think they could afford it. And it's teaching them the tools and skills they need to turn things around. And the first session we had, I think, over 400 people registered. So there's obviously great interest, and we'll continue that partnership.
That's a very admirable work. And David, I can't agree with you more. So much of it is public policy issues that need to be solved, at least in partnership with government. I know, for those of you who are longtime readers of the Business Journal, you know that we've been writing a series of stories this year. And we really, one of the issues that we really have talked a lot about is about affordable housing and the need for more affordable housing close to metro and close to where people are working, because ultimately that is the way to grow a stronger economy, a stronger, more inclusive economy where everybody has an opportunity to get a good quality job, and good quality housing will have all boats rise for all of us. But it's an argument that it's a conversation that we have to have with business leaders. So I'm glad that we're tackling it today. Leo, did you have anything you wanted to throw in on that?
I think that was fair. Okay.
Let me go in and see if we've got some more questions. There's another question from the group that we haven't actually tackled directly, but this fantastic year and a half of remote working, I say that with a little sarcasm, has certainly changed the way that we're thinking about our relationship to our homes, our relationship to our offices. And I'm curious if, as you think about the real estate market, if this move to more of a hybrid work environment will have any long-term impacts on the housing market per se.
Again, I'll just weigh in quickly, but again, Jan's boots on the ground on this and hears more directly from purchasers. But certainly among the things that we have seen as we emerge from the COVID lockdowns is people were looking for more elbow room. It's one of the reasons there's relatively more inventory of these close-in condos that don't have a balcony or access to outside space. So people were looking for that outside space. I don't know that we'll ever go back to the way it was before. They're looking for reliable high-speed internet connections, and that's not property specific that it has to be a property type, but given the fact that this is how we've lived our lives for the last 18 months, people need that. They want to have workspace that's separate from their living space if they can afford to do so. But having said that, I do think there is a craving for human connection, and that while some of this is never going to go back to normal, people want to go back to work. They want to work with each other by and large. And so to the extent that COVID has impacted housing decisions over the last 18 months, I would expect to see there to be a bit of a return to the close-in areas as well too. So I don't think this is a major permanent shift.
I know there's been a big move to have more work from home space because a lot of people will continue to work remotely even when this is over. So, you know, actual separate quiet rooms where people can actually get work done all day long. So if there's 2 adults in the household, that's 2 additional rooms you're going to need for office space. So that's been a big criteria in the searches for folks. Outdoor space, as David mentioned, has been key. Even pools, you know, a lot of people don't want to deal with a pool, right? But they can't go to the community pool because it's closed. So let's buy a house with a pool, right?
Right. Yeah. Anyone else? There's a really basic question here that I want to just, you know, if the average house is getting over $1 million in the region, who's buying them? Residents or investors?
Well, actually, if I could quote a statistic from GCAR,
Thank
the
you.
actual average price in the Metro DC area, the median sales price is $585. Granted, there's a lot of $1 million plus homes, but not all of them. So there's
That was a
opportunity for lower
softball for
prices.
you, Jad.
What's that?
That was a softball question for you to have your data available.
Right.
What other data do you have handy to tell us about the market, though? The median prices in the high 500s?
Yes, median for August at least. The August stats just came out. And that price is an increase of 1.7% compared to last month and an increase of 6.4% from this time last year. Average days on market was 20 days, and that's below the 5-year August average, August, mind you, of 28 days. There was a 4.3% month over month decrease in new contract activity. And as I mentioned, that's part of that summer slowdown.
Yeah.
So I think you'll see some very different numbers in our September report.
And Alex, just a couple of the things on numbers, and Jan, thank you for weighing in on that. This won't surprise anybody. It really depends on where you are as well too. The average sales price in DC in August was $810,000. That's the average price, which is stunning. The median is a little bit less than that. In Prince George's County, I'm just kind of plucking some random things. In the last 10 years, the median sales price in Prince George's County has gone up 140%. And again, it kind of gets back to the question about public policy issues and gentrification as well too. We love to see these rising prices. We also know there's a consequence to the rising prices as well too. So we're pricing some people out of the market altogether, but overall, it remains a very healthy market.
Great. So I'll give everybody a moment as we're sort of winding up our hour. I want to just ask you sort of to give some final thoughts on, you know, if we come back here and we have this similar conversation 12 months from now, which I hope that we do, what is going to be the same and what is going to be different in our local real estate market? Think in terms of a headline, think like you're a reporter here. Like what's going to be the same? What's going to be different 12 months from now?
I'd like to see a significant uptick in inventory 12 months from now.
Thank you.
Yeah,
right.
I'd like to see interest rates remain low. What do you think, Leo? I think that's a prediction, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to be 10, 15 pounds lighter, you know, next time that we do this, you know, hopefully that'll be different.
And now, Leo, we do have this on recording, so we're going to hold you to that.
That's accountability right there, I'll tell you.
All right.
Yeah, I do think the things that are going to be the same are pretty close to it are interest rates. I don't think interest rates are going to shoot up anywhere near where we were, prior to, the liquidity crisis, or even close to post liquidity crisis. In terms of different, I'm with you, Jen. I hope there's, more opportunity for more first-time home buyers, to get into the marketplace. But, hopefully, like I said earlier, I think, good people deserve great advice. And I know a lot of people that are on this call are agents that I adore and love. So as long as you align yourself with, the professionals in this room, I think you'll be just fine. So
Just one point on affordability, I want to mention, and Leo, you probably know more about this than I do, but last month, Montgomery County announced the availability of funds for first-time. I don't even think you have to be a first-time buyer, but closing costs and down payment assistance up to $25,000.
Yeah.
Right, Leo?
that's true.
Until they run out of money, at least. So, I mean,
Correct.
that's major for first-time buyers.
Lauren, what's your prediction here a
For
year from
me,
now?
I think that would certainly love to see some more increase in inventory. I do think that we're going to see a difference in technology in a year. I think, from last year to this year, I think we can all attest to technology being a little different. And I do think a year from now, we're going to see it in different ways. It doesn't mean that we're going to be disconnected from people on the ground, like, Jan showing a house, or Leo talking to him. Those are still very important people, but we might communicate with them in different ways, and it might make us more efficient, the technology. So I do think that's what we're going to see in another year as well.
Good. And David, I'm going to give you the final word here.
Well, as we've already noted, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think a year from now, we're going to be able to look back and say that we've seen a slow reversion to norm. Let's face it, in the seller's market, sellers sell. And in this seller's market over the last 2 or 3 years, sellers really haven't sold. We're seeing a return to the market of sellers, and buyer demand has remained very solid. What I do think is that the meteoric price rises that we've seen because of this constriction of inventory, we're going to see some easing up on that upward pressure. Still up, but not up as anywhere near as dramatically as we have seen.
Great. Well, right at the top of the hour, and I can't thank the four of you enough for this robust conversation. I really enjoyed our time together, and I know from all the chat in the chat that our attendees felt the same way. So thank you, David from McInerney, for your leadership in putting this workshop together. Jan from the Association of Realtors, Lauren from First Excel Title, and of course, Leo from Draper and Kramer Mortgage Corporation. I did not try to tackle your last name again there.
That's totally fine, man. Totally fine.
So
Alex,
thank you.
We thank you and your team. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex,
Great.
and your
Well,
entire team, and other panelists. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
And
Thanks, Jan.
our attendees, thank you for joining us. And you'll all get a copy of this video in your email tomorrow. A link to see it again if you missed any key parts, and you'll see an edited version of this in the Business Journal in the weeks ahead. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
Thank you, Alex.
have a great
Thank you,
afternoon.
Thank you.